How's it going? And welcome to episode 186 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You could follow me at 80 Grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting can be followed at Hasting Kevin. We got an amazing show for you, and because I didn't set this up properly, you can see for those watching us on the YouTube, we have a very special guest. I'll get right to it. Kyle Bland is joining us, and as you can see from the lovely graphic that Josh Sperry puts together for us, we will be talking about PL Projections version 1 for the 2025 season. I'm extremely excited to get into that. Before we get to Kyle, I want to make sure I check in with Kevin. Kevin, how are we doing? And are you ready? I mean, the World Series is everything everybody wanted. And I know you went on your every time I hear a phrase about nobody wants to see this World Series, blah, blah, blah. I think the Kevin's comments 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's like, I don't care who's watching or how many people are watching. My question is, and I know the answer, but are you going to be watching?
Yeah, the off season's almost over, right? We've had this huge break. We finally get World Series tomorrow on Friday, and I'm super excited for it. I'm not a fan of either of these teams. I was rooting against them in every series leading up to this, but this is going to be amazing. Shohei Ohtani versus Aaron Judge, Dodgers, Yankees, first time in 43 years. If you're not looking forward to this, you're not a baseball fan.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's every year where this doesn't happen, people make comments about Shohei not being in the World Series, Trout not being in the World Series, like the best players not being on the biggest stage. We literally are getting that. Like the four of the best offensive players in baseball, between Mookie, Shohei, Soto, and Judge alone, never mind the supporting cast of both teams, at least on the offensive side, is going to be fun to watch. And I'm saying that as a diehard Red Sox fan, which I am not. I am rooting for the Dodgers. I'm sorry, I'll say it. We already beat the Dodgers at one other point, so I'm not worried about we got that under our belt, and so that's fine. Kyle, welcome. Who are you rooting for the Comet, or do you have a rooting interest in this?
No, I don't have a rooting interest in it. I'm like a Mariners fan, so I'm just happy to watch postseason baseball that I don't have to stress out about. I never have a stake in the game, but. No, I think it's really fun. I think, and this is another one of those on the nerd side of there are a lot of really good players that rate really well by our metrics that we do. And so I'm always happy to see that our stuff is validated by team success. And one of the, I root for the players that PLV and my stats like to succeed as I'm seeing Carlos Rodon deal in the postseason. I'm like, yes, I've been high on him all season, and that's been tough. But now it's sweet vindication.
And you just need JP Sears to be in there, and then you'll be golden.
I think they're a couple years out.
Yeah, they're a couple of years out from actually playing in a major league stadium. Again, never mind the playoffs. So there's that. So, yes, of course, we have Kyle Bland, Director of Analytics, hence his great title. Sorry, not only great title, but also great Twitter handle of Blandalytics. Perfect, by the way. But you had that before you had your title. So, I mean, yeah. I don't know, chicken or the egg.
Manifesting it.
Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. See, it works, kids. Dress for the job you want type of situation, not the job you have. Let's get out some of, Kyle, I'm sure you'll do the rounds as well. I think with the first podcast you've done this off season. But now that your projections are out, the PL, I always forget, I always brand it differently every single time I mention it. I call them the PL projections, hence the name of the episode. But they're powered by PLV. We also reference them as PL bot projections just because that's a fun little
on the daily side.
Season. Hey, who won that, by the way? I didn't see the final
PL Bot won the streaming wars this year, so
That's
nice
awesome.
little feather in the cap.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, of course, if you listen to any podcast that Nick does, including On the Corner, but especially the Plus Pitch podcast, Nick will throughout the season talk about his streaming picks, and then the next day he'll say who won between his pick and PL Bot's pick, and lo and behold, PL the robot won this time. We'll see how that works out for 2025.
We're coming for you.
So let's get some formalities out of the way. And as I said, you're going to do the rounds. You're probably going to have a spiel ready for every single podcast you go on. But can you remind people at home, if they've been living under a rock, what exactly PLV is, what kind of goes into it, how maybe it's changed, because this is not the first year you've done this now. Mm-hmm. You finally have some kind of background, and how it's evolved over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, so just starting off super high level, what PLV is it is a model that is designed to estimate how good a given pitch is, and it does that using a variety of inputs that we get from MLB. And so it's things like, obviously where the pitch is one of the most important variables. So where it's located in the zone, where in the zone. But then we also take into account a lot of stuff factors, how did it get there? How fast is it going is obviously huge. How does it break? The approach angle. So how does it actually approach the batter at the plate is really important. And then we also take into account things like the count. Hitters have very different tendencies depending on what the count is. They'll generally watch a 3-0 pitch go by, or they'll take, you can't sneak an 0-2 pitch by them in the zone. They're swinging at anything that's mm-hmm. even close to the zone. So it takes into account a lot of that implicitly. And then it also factors in somewhat what their arsenal is like. So it kind of knows what's their fastball like that day. And then how does this slider compare to that fastball? How much slower is it? What's the break difference? Basically, so you can get some of those huge Matt Brashian movement differentials where one pitch breaks and it's going to be 3 inches above the zone and another's 4 inches outside. And it's just, you see these Frisbee pitch plots go. And so it takes all of that into account. It uses some machine learning models and some projection code that I've made and weights kind of the results. So it outputs, okay, this pitch, it does not take anything into account that the batter does. It doesn't know the batter, doesn't know the catcher, doesn't know the umpire. It just says, based on these characteristics, the model thinks it's this likely to be a swinging strike, this likely to be a ball, this likely to be a ground out, this likely to be a double, a home run, etc. So I like to think of it as what it's doing is it's doing hitter independent pitching. So, FIP is fielder independent, but this is literally stripping everything except the pitcher out of it. And it does a really good job. Like you said, this has been a couple years running now, and a lot of my calibration checks to make sure that everything is predicting and projecting how I want it to, everything looks in line. Of course, things happen of guys, my favorite is to use it and compare to the unlikeliest things. And so a lot of times, Shohei Ohtani pops up a lot of it's a ball that's down and inside, and he somehow fade away, steps back and golfs it over the right field wall there. And you're just okay, how likely was that to be a homer? And it's not at all. But it's fun to have an idea of this is how unlikely these things are that happen. And so then it takes all of those outcomes, it assigns values to them. So depending on the count, a swinging strike's great, but it's really good in a 2-strike count because that's an out, the hitter's gone. And so it knows that, and it implicitly weighs things like that, or a ball is more harmful the more balls are in the count, because that'll get you to a walk and all that stuff. And so once we have that, now that single pitch has a value, the pitch level value, and then a lot of the stats and the information that we see and we present and Nick talks about are at the game season level of combining them all together. And we scale it so that 0 is basically the worst pitch. 10 is this incredible DeGrom slider on the bottom corner that the batter can't do anything with it kind of thing. And so that's the PLV model. One of the things that We're really excited. We're incorporating it into the database this year. We're incorporating hitter stats, and we derive those from that model. So like I was saying, like with the Shohei Homer, is like he gets a ton of credit for making contact, for hitting that ball really hard, because neither of those things were super likely. And so then now we have like pitch adjusted measures of a hitter's ability. So how good are they at making contact? How hard do they hit the ball when they make contact? How good are the decisions they're making? And so now we have kind of these like more granular, more specific measures of how good a hitter is. And that's kind of what I consider our PLV like suite of metrics. Is we have the pitch level values for every pitch from every pitcher. And then now we also have the derived values from that for hitters to kind of give you better context for how they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I personally use PLV hitter stats and rolling charts more than I use the pitcher stats. Sorry, I just
no, I always joke.
Nick has said that all along.
PLV is a hitter
was
stat.
better for hitters. Yeah.
Yeah, like that was like from the get-go that like the reason I got, into pitch modeling was because I wanted, like, everyone's like, Juan Soto's so good at, he's like god tier decision values. And like I wanted to know like why, like what goes into that. And like a lot of the public stats like that are like, you have like Z-O swing rate, and like that tells a story, but like different guys, like it has benefits to different guys in different ways. And so then it's like, well, if you want to know how good that decision was, you have to know how good that pitch was. Sure. Like how likely was it to be a strike? How hard was it to hit? Like that kind of thing. Because then you get into like the like weird niche things of maybe it's better if you don't hit that pitch, because like if you have one strike, you miss, it's two strikes, like that's worse, but it's not the end of the world. But if it's a pitch like low and outside, if you make contact, that's probably just going to be a weak ground ball, and like that's an out. So instead of going from one strike to two strikes, you went from one strike to walking back to the dugout. And so in some cases, it's actually it helps provide a little bit more context, to a little bit more stories that way. Or if you've been on Twitter at all, look at about baseball, and you see like how badly did that screw this call up, of this gives credit for that, of like this knows like it's a probabilistic strike zone. So like, okay, 70% of the time that's a called strike. And so you get credit for that, but it's not taking away like, yeah, sometimes it's a ball, and like umpires have to make a call one way or the other, but it is like over the course of the season, those even out, and you get like a better idea of, well, he struck out on a pitch that like isn't always a strike, so he doesn't get a ton of demerit for striking out there, or the pitcher doesn't get as much credit for getting that strikeout kind of thing.
I mean, you alluded to it a bunch of times throughout that explanation, but what one of the stats that I love the most is decision value, and it's just, you talked about it with Ohtani. Somehow he does that golf swing, he gets it over the moon, like. But it probably wasn't the right decision to actually swing at that pitch, because 99 times out of 100, nothing will happen, even if you do hit it. And so I value decision but I think I value decision more than contact, because if you're making the right decisions, when you do make contact, it means that much more.
And one of the things too, like I'm glad you mentioned that like all of this is. So for the PLV on the pitcher side, the assumption is they're facing a league average hitter, swings a league average amount of time, makes contact a league average amount. Like that's the baseline that everyone's being compared to. Same thing on the hitter side, is how much better or worse are you doing than that league average assumption? And I'm glad you brought it up. One of the things, so we had these hitter stats last year, but one of the things that I was really wanted to do this year was to put them all on the same scale. So basically a run value scale, so that you can see things like Juan Soto runs a crazy average, not because he's elite at making barrel to ball contact. He's good. He's fine. He's like average to slightly plus at that, but he's swinging at pitches that result in hits more often than not, or more often than the rest of the league does. And so it is, you get these kind of fun things of his decisions are boosting his average, not necessarily what he's doing. Like he's setting a high floor for himself, basically. And then on top of that, he's, a great, very good contact hitter, great power hitter. So like you layer those skills on top, that's how you get this generational player. But it helps provide context of how are they getting to these outcomes? Is it because they're setting themselves up to succeed by making good decisions? Or in like the Ohtani example, was it a bad decision, but he's just so good that he can make contact there and make hard contact there. And like that will show up in the contact and the power stats, that like he gets a ton of credit for doing those things, assuming that over a big enough sample, he's consistently doing similar things. And you start to see that. One of the best examples of seeing this and how value is derived from these different skills was I posted early in the offseason about Adley Rutschman and what happened to Adley Rutschman. And Steve Giswelli pointed out in our Discord, which everyone should join, that he got hit in the hand sometime in late June. That it was a foul tip actually that like went and hit him in the hand. And I pulled up, it's his Process Plus. So that's our holistic hitter metric that folds all of these decision value contact power together into an all-in-one like WRC plus style stat. And you see it just tank starting in that June 27th, late June. It just takes a nosedive. But you can see the reason why wasn't because he was making the same decisions. So his decision value is still good. He's making good contact. Like the contact was so good. It was just that his power, how hard he was hitting the ball, completely left. And so it was like a very cool illustration of, oh, this explains, like this shows obviously like the line is like, yeah, this shows a decline, but it also explains how. That it is like he's not selling out, he's not whiffing more. It's just that he can't hit the ball as hard as he did before, and that's why his production cratered as the season went on.
And this is a perfect explanation too of like when you see power and you just see the term power, you think home runs. Like, I mean, I think that's what the average person sees the word power and they like, well, that means home runs. No, it doesn't necessarily, especially in Adley's case, because it wasn't just the homers that went away. It was the overall production. Like his batting average was terrible. His OB, like everything about getting on base was bad because he was making decent contact. He was making the right decisions, as you mentioned, but he wasn't hitting the ball hard enough to miss gloves, to get him through the hole, or hit the gaps, or just hit it right over the second baseman's head or something like that. They were coming in short, or they were coming in with enough airtime to make these pop-ups and obviously not making their way over the fence on a regular basis as well. So I mean, it's great because if you're a PL Pro member, which again, we're going to say this a lot this episode, fair warning to everybody out there, you should be, go sign up. You can get these projections, you can get in the Discord, but also you get access to all the apps that Kyle built out. In addition to the ones that you find on the page, we mentioned this in the show. Kyle just make an app because he was thinking about something, or somebody randomly mentioned something in the Discord. He's like, oh yeah, I can make an app.
That was like I did earlier this offseason, the playoff simulator, like a series simulator, because people were upset about, oh, well, a 3-game series is so unlucky. It should be 5, it should be 7, and like figuring it, like showing that like, it doesn't actually matter that much kind of thing. Another fun one I did later in the season because, I saw Sarah Langs does really cool. She has her wood probably like we charts this. So I was like, oh, I could like do my like spin on that and like actually put like a number to it and see like this is how that game was kind of thing.
Yeah, that was
so funny. Yeah, I'm always just like looking for new ideas. I love the stats and the numbers side of baseball. It's super fun. And I was joking with like Nick the other day that it's like the Matrix of like I have the spreadsheets and I just let the numbers like wash over me and I can see it. But like one of the things I really love to do is like make a good chart. Like I love the idea of like I can take those numbers and then put them into something that is like pleasing to look at and that is like informative for, I know we've talked about like the layman. Like I don't ever want to be like this super complex, like you need like a master's degree in statistics to understand what I'm talking about. I want it to be very deliverable, very accessible. I'm always keeping into account that like we're not a math department. We are a baseball website that caters to like fantasy specific fans, but also like broader baseball fans and people who,
Absolutely.
May not understand like how WOBA is calculated. And I get that, and there's space for you. And like, I appreciate anyone like that that's here. And I'm always happy and trying to make these advanced numbers, advanced metrics that may not be super intuitive, but I'm always trying to make them more accessible. So I always like, I'm looking for ideas from people in Discord or like feedback of, hey, this doesn't make any sense. What does this mean? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm happy to like, okay, here's a glossary, or here's like a, annotation or color code, that kind of thing. I'm always happy to tweak things to make it better, easier, and more fun for people.
Well, that's where I was trying to go with this, is that if you go to the apps that exist, the rolling charts, all the, what have you, you do a really good job of describing exactly what these terms are. You obviously Nick has his whole glossary of terms he's made up, but you also made up your own terms that have to do with the actual information, the data that you're presenting, and you do a really good job of outlining those. So, it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole and like look at charts and look at graphs and be like, oh, this line on here is going up, that must be good. But relatively speaking to other things, it's easy to kind of forget what that actually means and how you should actually be able to apply it. So yeah, Kevin, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. What is your favorite PLV stat to use? And you can't say Process Plus because we've talked about Process Plus enough over the last couple of weeks.
Oh,
pitching or hitting?
Well, I think it's the whole thing, all encompassing in general. It really is, because it's different than some of the other things out there that I've been using for so long. And it took me a while just to get out of the habit of always going back to the same places. And probably about mid 2024 season is where I was finally getting in the habit of looking at PLV charts and things first, or at least definitely including them. But yeah, the whole thing is absolutely amazing. I love it. Like I said, I was so excited when I saw this morning that the version 1 for 2025 was out. And when I tweeted that we would be talking about it on the show tonight, I said, "Drafting Degens rejoice. We have projections."
Yeah, usually, Steamer will be the one that like comes out quote first, at least from publicly facing ones.
Yeah, of course, Todd Zola's Monsters Ball is always out by November 1st.
Yep.
Yeah,
so
that'll be the next one.
You'll see those, and everybody will talk about those, of course, because especially Steamer, because it is publicly facing. It's a free projection that you can find on multiple states. Obviously, Fangraphs being one of them that I think is the most popular for viewing that. And what's funny is that it usually also coincides with the trip to AFL, First Pitch Arizona. And so that's always like a fun conversation to have, I'm sure, because I can't say that I've been, and I'm not going this year. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to bring it up now, Kevin, so you don't.
Hey, I'm missing it this year, Adam.
Oh, shoot. Okay, now I feel better. Kyle, are you going to be there? They're going to be.
I have 2 talks.
Okay, cool.
I'm giving a holistic talk on Process Plus, and then I'm doing a panel with Max Bay, the creator of Stuff Plus, and Alex Chamberlain from Fangraphs, and we're talking bat speed. I'm actually really excited. I had a call yesterday with Andrew 8, a hitting trainer at Driveline, just to pick his brain about bat speed. So we're going to be doing a lot of cool talks, and I think I'm going to try and make it into an article at some point this offseason, so that it's not only if you're at First Pitch, but you'll definitely get to see it live and ask me questions about it live at First Pitch.
I have to jump in here, Adam, because it's something I brought up on the show a couple of weeks ago, right? I have to ask Kyle about this. When we were talking about players that were a little disappointing for the 2024 season, and I included Mookie Betts because even with the injury, he still had over 500 plate appearances and didn't have near the production we would expect from him in that. And I happened to notice that on Baseball Savant, he's 13th percentile in bat speed. Now, the information we have public access to, we don't have anything prior to 2024 to compare that to, but I would bet a lot of money that Mookie Betts isn't typically 13th percentile in bat speed. So what would you say? Where should we go to like try to verify that that would be the case, and that was probably a lot of his problem?
I'm going to let Kyle answer that, but first we have to take a quick break. Had to get it in there. There.
Nice.
All right, Kyle. Now you can. I gave you a little bit of time. I stalled a little bit. Heard you typing away over there, so obviously you're looking something up. Give Kevin the rundown on what he's doing.
So if you're watching live on the YouTube, I threw it in chat. I have a bat speed app out because, of course, there's always an app that I have somewhere. I very much like, if you ever want to see what the inside of my brain looks like, just go to any of these apps because that's just how I think about all these things. But yeah, Mookie Betts, swing speed is below average. That doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world. I mean, we've seen that like players like Luis Arias has like a really slow swing speed. A lot of these guys generally, especially, and this is one of the things that I talked about with Andrew, is different players have different strengths and that they're trying to do different things. So like your big sluggers, your Stantons, your O'Neal Cruzes, they're trying to pull the ball and hit it high versus a guy like Mookie Betts. Like he's always had, I would say, like surprising power. Like he's a pretty small dude. He's got a pretty all fields approach. And then somehow he ends up like hitting a bunch of homers that go into those oppo field bleachers. But one of like the things is like, yeah, he's going to be slow. I noticed, I pulled it up on the app because I run things. I take basically MLB puts it out publicly on like a swing by swing level. They don't show that on their website, but they do a great job of, if you want, that data is available. And so I can take it and you can look at it over time. And it does look like he had that injury in the middle of the season and he did come back a little bit slower. It wasn't a lot and it is kind of variable, but it looks like he came back a little bit slower. And then another one of the things was his swing is a little bit longer. And so I was talking to Andrew about this. Some of that is trying to do, if he's trying to pull the ball more, your swing is going to be longer because you have to get out in front of the plate to pull the ball. Mm-hmm. It depends on pitch selection. If you're going outside or down, that's going to be a longer swing rather than high and tight. That's going to be a shorter swing. So there are like a couple factors, but these do kind of explain like, oh yeah, it does appear that his bat speed was sapped a little bit by that midseason injury. And I know, like, I'm curious to see, this is another one of the things you talked about, that like, it'll be cool to see off-season changes and like validating the news articles, the he went to Driveline that you see about like a half dozen hitters every season. And like, if that actually results in added bat speed. And I know in the past that Mookie Betts has been to Driveline, and I'm bummed because we only have 2024 data. We don't have anything prior.
Right.
And so we can't compare year to year, which is tough.
How long into 2025 would you wait before you're taking 2025's bat speed compared to 2024's into account?
Oh, it's fast. I would say probably by the end of the first series. Like, I think.
Oh, nice.
I haven't done it, but I've seen some research that it stabilizes like insanely fast. It's like a handful of swings. And so you could probably get that by the end of a game, depending on how aggressive they are. But I'd say like if you do get like a 3-game series, you probably have some actual like solid numbers to play with and derive some real good insights from.
That's going to make for an amazing first FAAB run when we start comparing bat speed from 2025 to 2024. That's going to be amazing.
Yep.
That's I mean, that really goes into, like, that leads into something that Kevin talked about earlier about, Kevin, you said that it wasn't until about mid-season that you really started leaning heavily on the PLV stats. And I think a lot of it has to do with just on the surface, it seems as though you need a decent amount of pitches seen, or you need some time to let things actually marinate in season, so that you can feel confident about seeing those rolling charts and seeing, if you see somebody who doesn't have a lot of pitches seen, that you see them with like 4 graphs over the course of like a month and a half. It's still colorful and nice to look at, but you feel like you can't really make decisions based on that. Is there a certain time period for a good majority, especially on the hitter side, that you can really start to see, like feel comfortable or confident when you're like, oh, I'm seeing actual change here? Or is it more so like, is it more impactful to look at like the Adley Rutschman type of situation where you're able to look back and explain something in hindsight?
I think it's tough, and I think it's player dependent. So for me, generally for like PLV, it stabilizes around 500 pitches, which sounds like a lot, but that's, call it 6 starts on a guy with like a 80 pitch count, 85 pitch count. So that's not that fast, or not that slow. Like you can get that definitely by the end of the first, like around the end of the first month and a half, like 6 weeks in. For hitters, these stats that we've been talking about generally stabilize around 400 to 500 pitches, which is, hitter usually sees about 16 a game. So that'll be about, 25, 30 games in. So probably right around the same time, like 6 weeks into a season, they've played enough games to really have a sample to compare, to have an idea of like, okay, this is where they're at right now. Another thing to keep in mind is like, that's great for guys we don't have a lot of sample for. So guys like your rookies, your call-ups, guys who didn't play a lot last year. I'd also be looking at guys who are like, we know are coming back from injury, or who we'll start to see these news articles of like, oh, he got this surgery, that surgery, the other thing. And like kind of validate like, oh, is he back? Or is he like he's still hurting? He's still nursing something. But for a lot of like your established players, I'd say you could give them a little more time. Like don't make snap decisions. Like that's how you end up trading Aaron Judge after his first month this year, and then he just goes nuclear. Is it's just like he'll be okay. Like it's Aaron Judge, and it was like he was fine. Like he was slightly above average by our stuff, which is very disappointing for Aaron Judge, but like isn't a huge red flag. And then sure enough, he turned it on and went just absolutely nuclear the rest of the season. So I would kind of couch it that way of, if you have an idea of like, this guy is going to be different from last season, whether that's because it's a young guy, whether it's injury, whether it's like a new call up, that makes sense about that, like 400 or 500 pitch for batters, 500 for hitters or for pitchers. Oh my gosh. Sorry. But if it's a longer, like a veteran guy, you could give him a little bit more leash to get back to it.
Let's get into the actual projections, the topic at hand here. Now we have a better sense, everybody listening, hopefully at this point you have a better sense of PLV, what it goes into it, and then how it's actually used. So how are these stats and these decisions and the power metrics and the PLV on the pitching side, how are they actually incorporated to actually predict? Now most of these things, we've been talking about them in a way where we're seeing the results, right? They're results based, or pitch based, and then and actually what actually comes from it. How are you then translating that into a projection model to then predict what they're going to do, especially this early in the offseason when you don't know where a third of the league is going to be playing next year? You don't know in what capacity, what role they're going to have. And you don't know. I mean, you do know your schedule, but obviously you don't know who they're going to be facing. And so obviously you have to take certain things with a grain of salt as you're making these calculations. Why should we trust you, Kyle, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, like we talked about earlier that, the projections last year fared really well. I was focused on putting these ones out. I haven't had a chance to do like a full retrospective and see how the full season projections compared to the actual results. But anecdotally, like the PL Bot streamer pick, like those are based on the preseason projections. It updates as the season goes on, but they performed really well, like using these as a baseline. So there are some, like, we have results backed validation in addition to just general, more process based validation of, we know stats, generally stats like ERA, BABIP, like there are stats that are very relevant to how players perform and how they perform on our fantasy teams, but they can be pretty fluky. They can be, noisy. And so what projections do, and like what I do, is I try and take a lot of different variables, a lot of different factors, and some of them are more stable year to year, or and so you give more credit to the player for those ones. Or, maybe they got unlucky. Maybe they got BABIP to death as a pitcher. Maybe guys just really hit him around more than we'd expect. Or maybe, same thing like for hitters, like maybe they just had, Ohtani's having this really weird, he can only hit with runners on and not with the bases empty. And so like, that's another thing of like situational context that generally historically evens out over time, but it seems just like, oh, he's going to have 200 RBIs next year if he keeps this pace going. And it's like, no, like that's not true. So it's a lot of validating and seeing what is predictive of a next season's performance, and taking a lot of, like, I take a lot into account, but just understanding that some things are better than others. Projections are always kind of like a tough game, because it's, especially for fantasy, that the idea of the model is you're trying to lower, or you're trying to minimize the error, the misses across the population, which for us is like, for me is the broader MLB population. But a lot of those outliers are those elite first round fantasy types. And so it's challenging. And that's been something that I've been working on, to try and like incorporate a process that better reflects that elite top end a little bit more. So what goes into the PLV projection specifically is, I'm sure like a ton of other projection systems out there, you're taking in historical data. How did they perform last year? Strikeouts, walks, performance on batted balls, all that good stuff. And then a lot of the projections now will also fold in underlying metrics. So for pitching, it's like your pitch level, like swinging strike rate, called strike rate. For your hitters, exit velo, launch angle, barrel rate, all that kind of stuff. And so those are all great. And like, there are an infinite amount of ways that you can kind of utilize that information to make very good projections. And, I'm not too familiar with the secret sauce that goes into everything, but I'm sure Steamer, the BatX, Zips, that Baseball Prospectus's projections, they all like, I would say probably close to 80% of the features everyone uses. And it's like, it's true across the way, because it is like, they're very prevalent, and they're very predictive. Like there's a reason strikeout minus walk rate is like the granddaddy of pitching stats. It's extremely effective, even though it doesn't scream advanced stat. It doesn't have to. If it's a good stat,
if it works, it works.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Like I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like I'm happy to not have to do more work. I'm happy to let the stuff we already have speak for itself. But but like folding that in is like, now I have a bigger sandbox to play with, thanks to the PLV stats that I've kind of mentioned. And so especially on the pitcher end, it's super fun, because I have things like, here's what I expect all of their pitches, like here's what I expect their swinging strike rate to be. So it's not just what was it actually, it's I have an expectation now for like what a pitch level stat like that is. And I can utilize that, and it helps kind of sway the projections a little bit, that it is just like, it provides more context for, oh, this is a swinging strike last year based on the pitches he saw, this is what PLV thinks it is. And using both of those metrics, I can get a more accurate projection for the next season. And I do that across a variety of stats, and then depending on, I guess, like how granular they are. So like those are very pitch level, but then you could fold a lot of those together, and now you have strikeout rate. And then you fold like strikeout rate with walk rate and batted ball results. And now you can get something like a run estimator. So that's how you get to like your ERA. And so you can fold a lot of those things together, and get those higher level ones, those more fantasy relevant ones. But it's even something that seems very obvious, like a home run. How many home runs is he going to hit? As well, you need to know how many fly balls is he going to hit? How many balls is he going to hit? How often does he whiff? How often does he swing? It doesn't even, if a guy, you're Dan Vogelback, that he just doesn't swing, even though he has a great ability to make contact and he's got some pop, that those are going to be less just because he swings less often.
Mm-hmm.
And so now with the PLV stats, it's like I have an idea of, well, how much do we expect him to swing? And then how does that relate to an average like bucket of pitches that he sees? And then how does that inform how often he'll swing at pitches next year? And then you can, trickle back up of like, okay, this is how often he swings. This is how often he makes contact. This is how often that contact's in the air. And this is how often those air contact is hit hard enough to leave the yard. And so it's all of that, like a ton of different small level things go into it and they get folded in together in a way that gets us to kind of these nice end results. And then now, additionally, I have an idea of like, okay, and this is what his power was. This is what like adjusting for the pitches he saw. This is kind of like how much damage he's doing or how much contact he's adding. And that provides, like I said, kind of with the pitching side, like more context that allows us to have an idea of, especially from a projection standpoint, it's really nice to have a comparison to league average because that's kind of what you need to assume going into next year, especially for these guys you mentioned, free agents. You don't know what division they're going to be in. You don't know what their park's going to be like. And so how do you do that? Well, you assume that it's going to be like, you have to assume it's going to be league average. Maybe as the offseason goes on, you start to read Jeff Passan. Once he tweets something out, it's basically gospel, so you can run with it. But, before that, you can take an idea and like all frequently, like Blake Snell was a really annoying one last year because he took so long to sign. And it's just like, here's what I would project. And then like, you can also have an idea of like, okay, if he signs here, his wins are going to be higher because his team's better. If he signs here, if he signs in Cincy, like, okay, his ERA is going to go up a little bit because it's super homer happy, like that kind of thing, that you can have educated ways to influence that. But it's nice to have kind of like that baseline relative to league average kind of thing.
I think it's incredibly important to know, you don't need to know the secret sauce. I wasn't expecting you to give me the actual, equations and algorithm, whatever. But I think as a consumer of these projections, of all of them, to have a general idea of what's actually important to the person or persons that are putting these together, can go a long way into, the weight that you put in. Because I guarantee, I know, because I do this, that there are a lot of people out there that take multiple projections and they create their own projections based on their own spreadsheets. They just take the numbers and they see which one, they weight them in a different way. And it's probably not as scientific as what you're actually doing. But there's going to always be the thumb on the scale. I'm sure you have the thumb on the scale a little bit. But my question is to you, Kevin. It's like, what are you looking when you are looking? You've been looking at projections for years and years, like most of us have, and you obviously have created a bias in your own head about which ones you look at, even when new ones come out. Right? It takes. You said it yourself. Like it takes a little while to either get used to it or actually start seeing the results from these either projections or actual stats. What is important to you to know is being accounted for in projections when you are considering kind of looking at new ones?
Flip it around. For me, it's been more important the one or two times when I actually knew something wasn't being included. So if I wanted to adjust for that, I'm not putting a thumb on the scale. I'm not double counting it. Best example was 5 or 6 years ago. I heard Eno on Rates and Barrels say that barrel rate is not in any of the projections out there. I adjusted my sheets based on barrel rate, moved guys up and down a little bit, and it worked wonderfully for me. And it was the following season that Derek Carty came out with the bad X.
Right.
Awesome. Yeah. So that took that advantage away, but it was great that somebody did that. So Ariel Cohen, Derek Carty himself, when I've seen him in person at First Pitch or in Las Vegas, I've asked them and other people that make projections.
Yeah.
Is there something that you don't have included that you wish was? Is there something that's not included in your projections that maybe I should take into account? Because I'm very careful about not doubling up and giving something emphasis when it's already included.
Yeah. What's the answer then? You asked a question, and what is missing? Because I think Kai would like to know.
Yeah, you once you figure it out, just let me know. Version 2 will come out pretty quick after you tell me.
Nice.
And then, as we notice, as we're looking through these projections as they come out, especially as you mentioned, it's based on, a lot of it is based on league average. You don't know where these guys are going to be playing, but we also don't know like how much they're actually going to be playing. And a lot of projections don't do playing time, right? They just don't project it.
Here's another example. At about that same time, the same subject, I asked Alex Chamberlain, and I said, so barrel rate's not included in projections. On the pitching side, what's something that's not included in the projections that, as far as that I should be looking at? His answer at that time, again, this was 5 years ago or so, he said, inducing soft contact. He said, we have to figure out a way to quantify that. There's a reason Kyle Hendricks outperforms his ERA projections every year at that time, right? So yeah, there's always something that somebody will come up with. If we can get that in there, you're going to have an advantage over the people not taking it into account.
And I mean, the thing that you're not incorporating, Kyle, in your projections right now is playing time. You put everybody at 160. So I don't have them in front of me. Remind me, it's 160 innings and
for starters,
60 innings for
relievers,
and how many plate appearances for the
600 plate appearances for all hitters. Yeah, catchers, all the positions, just a flat 600.
So do you think that as the offseason goes on, version 2, version 3, are you going to continue to put them out in that way? Or are you going to start adjusting for team context and expectations of not only injury concerns, platoon splits, et cetera, or are you going to let the rates kind of speak for themselves and allow people to make the adjustments as they see fit?
I'm happy to have V1 be the rates-based one, just because it gives you an idea kind of like the talent level. And that's not to say that availability, it's the most important ability. But when they're playing, this is how good they are. I think there's a lot of insight to be gleaned from that. For future versions, I don't know quite if it'll be for version 2, but definitely as the offseason goes on, I'm going to factor in actual playing time estimates, that more accurate ideas of what I think will happen. So for your Ohtanis, your Judges, your Marcus Semyons, like guys who have a history of being healthy, at least hitting for Ohtani, and hit at the top of good lineups, they're going to have more plate appearances. Catchers are going to have fewer plate appearances. We chatted about this a little bit before we started recording, but the platoon. So like platoon guys, your Jock Petersons, right now they have 600, and they're actually probably going to have less because they're not going to hit against lefties or, whatever, depending on the platoon is. That this is basically just extrapolating what side of the platoon they're on to 600 plate appearances. It's not like adding pitches from lefties to their platoon base. It's not that. And so once I start to do actual playing time estimates, that'll be much more reflective of what we expect to see from them as the season goes on. But yeah, right now it's so early in the off season. I mean, there's still the World Series hasn't even started yet. But I was very comfortable putting out kind of the rate stats. And then I have ideas, like a lot of, one of the big things that's an issue right now is figuring out who's a starter, who's a reliever, because that's going to be a big indicator of playing time on the pitching side. And then for hitters, I feel a little bit more confident because they're hitters. They're going to start every day most of the time if they're healthy, if they're good. But I do have estimates for where in the lineup they'll be based on where they batted last year. Did they switch teams? What does the team context look like of, okay, well, this is his average, this is his walk rate, like ISO, and then fold that in and be like, okay, generally teams bat that guy third or bat him fifth or bat him leadoff. And so I actually project out lineup order, and then that's how I get plate appearances. And if it's a good team, like if the rest of the hitters are good, that team will get more plate appearances, they'll bat around more often. And so you could start to fold that context in. But this early in the offseason, especially, like we don't even have rumors on where free agents are going, that I just figure doing the rate stats is great for version 1.
Yeah, sure.
People can play around with it now.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, I mean, you'll say this throughout the offseason, or at least you have in the past, about, you know, putting your thumb on the scale of these projections based on what you think the playing time is going to be for a particular player. I think, and you can obviously, if you have insight about a certain team or a certain situation, you know, obviously can play that game.
Yeah,
I'm going to start that tonight. I already downloaded the sheet and moved it over so I can start manipulating it. I'm going to break it down to per plate appearance and then adjust the at bats. I'm starting, you know, I'm 6 hours ahead. So when you guys are going to bed, it's still early evening for me. And I'm going to be on that tonight, starting to put in my playing time on some of these players.
Yeah. Perfect. And that's one of the things too, like I'm very proud of this. I put a lot of work in. It's very like rigorously backed, but it's also like, I'll put my thumb on this. Like once draft season comes around, it's just like, well, this, that, and the other thing. Because there are so many variables that I take a lot into account, but I can't take everything into account, you know?
Well, that's a great point because Kyle, you are drafting, or I think, did we finish? I'm not sure. We are doing our PL mock draft. Is it done? And you had the first overall pick, and the rule was for you that you were supposed to draft solely based on these projections. And so I was obviously I didn't have eyes on these projections until you put them out just like yesterday or the day before. And so I haven't been able to compare your picks to the rankings that are on these projections, but they better be accurate. No, just
obviously 1-to-1, of course. It was perfect. I knew, you know, when we started this, like a week and a half ago. Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
No, I did like that. Was the very start was a combination of, and I'll talk about this, I'm sure, but it was like a combination of looking at the POV stats and then like vibes basically. And it's just like, I knew, I was like, okay, that's why I was like, I need to go 1-1 because I know Ohtani is going to be the number 1 hitter. So like, that's easy. And then buy myself some time to get the projections in a better spot. And then it was, of course, sure enough, I have Judge, I think, ranked as the number 1 hitter right now in the projections that went out. But, you know, that's such is life.
Yeah.
But no, I feel pretty good about them. Or at least like the guys I picked are at least defensible by our POV metrics. But it is like halfway into the draft was when I had like a good rough draft of the projections. And so that's when I started really leaning into like, okay, here's a guy, like here's best guy available kind of thing. And like that Schwellenbach pick was like, he was a really good one. Like a lot of the pitchers like Kikuchi, Pivetta, but even getting into, I know it got some pop, but like Victor Robles in the 21st round. I was just like, he's a guy who like really, I mean, it is again per 600, he might not get that much playing time, but that like he's got a really good stolen base like floor over multiple seasons, and he crushed it in Seattle, and they're probably going to basically give him playing time until the wheels fall off. So,
he went a lot later than I thought he was going to, based on what where I've been seeing him get drafted in other actual drafts at the moment, and how he finished the season, and the fact that Seattle gave him the extension already. And it seems as though he took over the leadoff spot going into next year, but you know, we'll see how spring training goes and how those decisions. We got to talk about how you actually score these rankings and what that means. And we'll get into some player discussions comparatively to that sample, that small sample ADP. We'll do that right after this break. All right, so Kevin brought up something great at the beginning or before we started recording about you include in these projections actual like not only rankings for hitters and for pitchers in comparison to each other, but also basically a score. You call it a proxy score. Can you give and I think what's nice about these, and I want to get your like what goes into those scores, is that it really allows you to put hitters into tiers, and it allows you to kind of like put players in groupings, just like Nick will talk about in his rankings, his pitcher rankings. It's like, yeah, the guy that I ranked 21st might not be the whole lot different than the guy I ranked 33rd if they're in the kind of same tier and they're giving you very similar production. But you got to put them in number ranking because that's what people want to see. So talk to us about what goes into those proxy scores and what those actually mean and how much they should be weighted compared to what the actual stats that we're looking at in these projections.
Yeah, so I mean, everybody, when you're drafting, you're drafting a player's stats in their entirety. You're not like, oh, I'm going to take Judge's homers in the first round. I mean, that's what you're doing, and you get a bunch of other great stats, but it's not specifically just one thing that you're drafting. You're drafting a player. And so that's kind of the idea behind these value proxies, is it's taking the standard 5x5 stats. For hitters, I also included an OBP, so it just swaps OBP for average. But it's taking those 5 categories for hitters and pitchers and seeing how their projected stat relates to league average. So depending on how in the weeds you are with draft strategy and projections, it's the Z-score method. So you're seeing how many standard deviations away from the average this player is, and then it combines them all. And so that's basically what this is across all 5 stats, how many standard deviations better is this player at all of the categories. And it's going to implicitly take into account things like scarcity of it'll bump guys up if stolen base, if the league's stolen base projections are low and a guy is high, then it'll do well with that. It also takes into account, at least my particular flavor of it, does weight rate stats by playing time. So if you have a good average and you get more plate appearances, then that's going to be more valuable than a guy who has the same average with fewer plate appearances. Right now, it's not quite as important because, like we mentioned, they're all standardized playing time. But definitely as the offseason goes on and these updates happen and you get more individualized playing time estimates, you'll start to see guys really go up and down the rankings depending on their playing time or like the league playing time kind of around them. And so that's the idea behind that. The value proxy was just a way to see like a guy. At the top, like Judge versus Ohtani, they're 1 and 2, pretty neck and neck in the value proxy. And the way they do it is Judge has the more traditionally good power metrics. He leads the projections in homers by like 4 whole homers. He laps the field in RBI projections, but he only has 6 stolen base projection. Versus Ohtani is more of a 5 category threat, even though he does have a slightly decreased RBI estimate just because he's batting leadoff. I mean, it's good. It's still better than average because it's the Dodgers and he's a great hitter. But so that's how, they have roughly similar overall production, and how they get there is different, in a couple different ways.
So, I mean, Kyle, you talked a lot about, what's going into these projections, why, they should be trusted. Kevin, I want to put you on the spot here, and you've had some time to look over the projections. Like I said, this is your idea, so I'm assuming you've had some time to really scan it over. Give me a name that just really just pops out as being like, Kyle, what are you doing? Like, this is just like, this can't be right. And then I want to know and then I'm going to put you on the spot for the second one. It's like, hey, the one where you're like, I had a feeling that this guy was probably underrated, and Kyle's nailing it here. And I'm happy about it that nobody else sees these rankings yet. Just me. But first, I want to know the one that you think he got wrong.
I want to go with the second one first.
All right, fine.
Yeah.
Because Uncle Ted in the chat is going to love this. Kerry Carpenter as the 15th ranked hitter, right? And his ADP right now is in the 170s. 15th ranked hitter in the 170s, and somebody Uncle Ted's been bringing him up. We've talked about him a lot. That I am very happy to see up here. Kind of reinforces our feelings that he's going to be a great value going into 2025. Now, one is, what is he doing here? I didn't have that initial reaction really on anybody because I've been staring at this for several hours today already. I got one though. Yep. I won't be drafting Paul Goldschmidt anywhere near the 33rd hitter, and you won't have to, but I'm he's gonna have, I don't want to ever say I'm completely out on anybody, but he's going to have to drop a long, long ways for me to be interested. I don't know if I would agree with the numbers that come out for Paul Goldschmidt here.
Yeah, and these, of course, these, we're not going through this entire list. We're not going through every single projection. If you want to see every projection, obviously, go get PL Pro, go download the projections and manipulate them how you want. But Kyle,
that's a great point. But bringing up Paul Goldschmidt, I should at least let people know what he's projected for. 262 average, based on 600 plate appearances. 262 average, 23 home runs, 81 runs, 82 RBI, 10 stolen bases. From what we saw in 2024, I have a hard time seeing him perform to that level in 2025.
Especially since obviously we don't know where he's going to be playing. I mean,
right.
A lot of us are kind of eyeballing like the same thing that we saw with Jose Abreu last year. Ironically, is that we're hoping he goes to play in Houston because they need a first baseman. He has ties to Houston apparently as well. And obviously it would be a good park for him to hit in if he can, use those Crawford boxes to his advantage.
Yeah.
But Kyle, like you said yourself, that you're doing this based on league average, not that he's playing in Houston, not that he's playing in Colorado, also not like he's playing in Seattle or other pitcher friendly parks. So I defend yourself. Why is Paul Goldschmidt so good?
Yeah, I think no one's going to argue it wasn't a down year last year. I think he got a little bit unlucky, and you could see that in a variety of ways. But like the easiest one to me was his observed WOBA was 310. His ex-WOBA was 333. And that's a pretty decent gap, especially over 600 plus plate appearances. Like that's a pretty substantial amount of performance. And so that's just in what he's doing with the stick. I would also argue that he got pretty unlucky with the situational factors. So I think he had 70 runs, 65 RBIs, which is crazy low. So that's kind of like the projection I have. And I'm just looking at his now. Is this like, oh, well, he did, 20 plus homers. He had 11 stolen bases, but I have him for 10 and fewer plate appearances. Like those like more skill-based ones do track. His average, I do have a little higher. Part of that is, historically, he's been a super high average hitter. And even in a down year, he had 245 last year. So it's not like he was a bum. And so it's more of some of this is regression in a positive way that he's going to come back in terms of, I think he got unlucky with his bad ball results. And then I think he got unlucky with how runners were situated around him, that how like either batters on base in front of him or when he's on base, hitters behind him. I think he got somewhat unlucky in that. And that's something too that like a projection will factor in, that you'll see like those are always so tough because it is so context driven. And like that, we've talked about, we don't know where he'll be playing, and that'll be a huge factor in how many runs and RBIs he's going to get. Cause is he going to be hitting at the top of a lineup because he's the team's best hitter? Or is he going to be, signing with like the Astros who have a pretty established top of the lineup and he hits closer to 5th or 6th? And so you start to see like, that's how that can affect it. But like, I'm pretty confident that he's a 2010 guy. And that doesn't sound great, but like 20 and 10, 260-ish average, I'd take the over on 255 is I guess how I'd say that. And then, it's not showing in these projections, but like 650 plate appearances plus 4 years running. Like, the dude is an Iron Man for fantasy baseball's a point of view. So like, I think he gives you, he's going to be an accumulator. Nothing's going to be really sexy. Nothing's going to pop. But like, these guys who do contribute in all 5 categories, even if they're not winning a category for you, I think that's one of the benefits of having that all-in-one value of it boosts them up, because you're not seeing, oh, it's going to be 30 homers or 30 stolen bases or 100 RBI, but being better than average in 5 categories does have a ton of sneaky value.
Sure. And especially, and we brought this up at the before we started recording too, it's like, especially in a roto league where you're going to extrapolate all those stats throughout the season. In a head-to-head league, maybe a little bit less value of those guys, even if they are a 2010 guy, regardless of what position. You don't know when you're going to get those 10 stolen bases. If you get all 10 of them in 1 week, great. You know, you got what you needed in that week. You win that category. Hopefully walk away with the win in a win-loss league. And you know what? If you get them all 10 of those stolen bases in a week in a roto league, also great, because then you can feel really comfortable cutting them and cutting bait and then filling it in with somebody else who's going to get you even more on top of that. All right, I put together a list of groupings of like 5 players that stood out to me in comparison to the, again, slightly larger but still very small sample of ADP that we get out of NFBC compared to the rankings, general rankings of the position eligibility, hitters versus pitchers. And I'm gonna drill you guys on these groupings of players right after we take this quick break. All right, so we're gonna start with hitters here, as we typically do, and I made 3 groupings here. One is a grouping of 5 players that stood out to me that are currently being drafted higher than their rank, decently higher. We're talking a couple rounds, or at least in comparison to their hitter rankings on the projections. The next one after that will be the ones with the projections. Kyle, your projections are much higher on, and so. Kevin, I'm going to let you take the lead on the ADP ones and tell me why you think they're being drafted much higher than the projections, and if you would agree with the ADP in comparison. And then Kyle, I'm going to have you do the same thing with your projection, the ones that the projection ones are higher on. So I'll give you all 5 names so everybody can make notes at home. And they range from, first or second round, all the way to like a top 100 hitter. And again, these are all hitters. Jackson Chourio, Anthony Volpe, Parker Meadows, Ceddanne Rafaela, and Dylan Cruz. So big mix, mostly young players, actually all very young players. So I wonder if that has anything to do with it. But Kevin, I guess my first question is, how much do you think that youth has to do with it in the shiny new toy at the draft table compared to what projections either aren't taking into account, can't take into account, or refuse to take into account?
Yeah, that's completely what is going on here. We have 4 first or second year players and a third year player that's a New York Yankee. That's why ADP is higher on them. But flat out. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because all projection systems traditionally are going to be a little harder on the young players that don't have the track record for them to be inputted at all. I get that. But yeah, 100%, this is that they're young players and a New York Yankee who is also young, just slightly older than the others. That's all it is here. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't be drafting them at ADP or going to get your guy and jumping them a little bit. Just know that all projection systems are going to weigh these guys down a little bit for not having that track record to take into account.
Now we'll do a whole episode on this, Kevin. But I'm going to
absolutely. You gave me the easy question. Thank you.
Of these five, which one are you most comfortable? Because I agree. Like, you just don't know, and like, they fail more than they succeed, right? Especially first year players, if not second year players as well. Between though Chourio, who obviously we've spoken about earlier in earlier episodes, Volpe, who has a little bit more experience, Meadows, who was hurt for a good chunk of time this past year as well, Rafaela, who who knows what his role is going to end up being with Boston, especially with, Roman Anthony coming up and others coming up the middle for the Red Sox, who probably will make their debut throughout the season. And then Dylan Cruz, who obviously just got his cup of coffee and would assume he will be right back up there next year. Which one are you feeling, especially in comparison to their ADP? Which one are you most comfortable hitting closer to their ADP than their projections?
We'll pick a couple of them. And as much as I love Jackson Chourio, I just can't do second round on guys we have only seen for a full season at most. He was close to a full season. He had, I think, 593 plate appearances, if I remember it correctly. So, but that's still not quite enough to pick at an ADP of 19 for me, and that's bitten me in the past. I wasn't drafting my favorite player in Major League Baseball right now, Bobby Witt Jr. I was not drafting him before we had seen 2024 at where he was being drafted. And sure, I'm going to miss once in a while like that, but more times than not, I think it's a safe play to avoid guys this young, that early in a draft. The two I do like at their position, Parker Meadows, because I think, one, it's not that big of a difference. Yeah, 32 picks is over 2 rounds, even in a 15-team league, but it's a little closer gap than some of the other players. And if he is going to lead off, like we saw when he was performing in 2024 and when he started to heat up late in the season, and with the Tigers being an up-and-coming team, I think I can stomach that 32-pick ADP advantage, I guess you would say, over the projections. And then Dylan Cruz, because it's later. Now we're talking, that's towards the end of the 7th round in a 15-teamer. We're talking 9th round in a 12-teamer. At that point, I'll start taking chances on some of these guys. So of these guys that ADP is favoring, the two that I'd be most likely to draft at ADP, even though the PL Pro projections have them a little lower, Parker Meadows and Dylan Cruz.
To be fair, looking at the numbers that I have posted on here for the rankings, remember, these are rankings based on their hitter rankings compared to their hitter ADPs.
Oh, that's right.
So it's actually,
I was actually going to bring that up, and I forgot.
So it's actually more than 32 pick in that example that you're using with Parker Meadows. There's actually more than 32 picks in between, but only about 30 or so hitters in between that are going higher or lower than that. Kyle, the only question I'm going to ask you about this before we move into the players that are higher on the projections is exactly what Kevin talked about, and taking into consideration their youth, their inexperience, and historically we see projections do this, and not, especially rookies, never mind guys that are first or second year players. How are you accounting for that, if at all? Because you only have so much data. You have more data available to you than most do. Let's acknowledge that. But you still don't have all of it, because we don't have data beyond at least AA, and not even every AAA ballpark provides publicly facing data as well. So how are you accounting for the fact that a lot of players skip AAA? A lot of players, just perform differently when they are in the majors compared to where in the minors, and the track record of others that come before them, they have literally nothing to do with them as individuals, but the trends are obviously there and they have to be weighing on you.
Young players, I'll go, hand up, it's somewhat of an issue with PLV based metrics, just because, like you said, I don't have that granular access of data in the minors. I mean, I still have and use some minor league data to inform this. Another big one is because I use their performance, and you can age adjust it, and that depends stat to stat of something like stolen base rate will actually go down kind of as their attempts will go down, but their success will go up because they get slower, but they also get craftier. So sometimes that evens out depending on the player or depending on their baseline. And then for things like walk rate usually goes up as a player ages. And same, like, you've seen age curves. And so that's a thing that exists in all projections. The thing about those age curves, and I mean, it's a broader idea of projections in general, is they're based on all players. And so you'll see like that includes so Dylan Cruz is 22. And so this includes all 22-year-olds who've made the MLB, which is by selection bias, usually a very good representation of players, but it just might not be, there are some busts too. And so like, I'm not taking into account two things that you can know. And this is I would say like an easy thumb on the scale kind of thing is I don't have like prospect grades. So like, I don't know why, that Jackson Trio was the number one prospect and that he was given, 70 speed and these kind of grades. Like, I don't incorporate that. Or sorry, like I know that, but I don't incorporate that. PLV projections don't incorporate that. And same thing with Dylan Cruz of it doesn't know his prospect pedigree of, he lit the world on fire at LSU, drafted, second overall, was, one of the best prospects in a long time. I will say he's kind of scuffled a little this last year, both in the minors, where being only 106 WRC plus at AAA is kind of like not a great idea. Like, it doesn't bode super well for him, or it doesn't excite me, I'll say. And then, an 80 WRC plus is fine. And he got unlucky in the majors, but it's also just nothing to really write home about. And so that's where I think something like that comes for those young players in general. And then I think there are other things too, like Cedon Rafaela was on this list, and that he's someone who our POV projections actually provide a lot more context. If he has horrific decision value, that he is swinging at anything and everything he can and trying to just he doesn't have an approach at the plate. And I think he actually did pretty well based on how bad it was. But I mean, it's still a 79 WRC plus, a walk rate under 3%. Like, he's having a really hard time just trying to figure out a pitch he can hit. And so that's why I think I'm not quite as optimistic about him going into this season. But again, these are young players. Like, the error bars are going to be wider of it's like they can crush it and they can, solve something in the off season, or, the bottom can drop out, that they can just really struggle. And it just really then those things, those luck-based skills, once that luck falls away, they don't have a baseline to kind of come back to.
Yeah. And so that leads us into this grouping of players that your projections currently, as they're currently built out, are much higher than the small sample of ADP. And of course, this is the name of the game, right? When you're drafting, you want to get as much value out of your picks as possible. So you want to be able to let these guys drop, just because your projections, that your rankings might value these guys. This is where ADP comes into play. This is where you can play the ADP game and actually, let these guys come to you instead of reaching for them, so that you can get the value out of that. So Kyle, your projections here are valuing Marcell Ozuna, Brent Rooker's probably the biggest one on this list, Vinny Pasquantino, Alex Bregman, Xavier Edwards. And I wanted to be able to say, well, look, it's all the old guys, but no, there's, Xavier Edwards is he's been actually in the league probably longer than most people realize, but he's not old. Obviously, Brent Rooker, Vinny Pasquantino, also not old. Bregman or Ozuna, they're up there a little bit more. But I guess, what is it? I mean, I'll single out Rookers because of the drastic ranking difference compared to ADP. Unless my sheet is all screwed up, and we'll leave that one off the table. Rooker's eighth ranked hitter in your projections, 47th ranked hitter on ADP as far as ADP goes. What is it about Rooker, and then what is it about all these guys that you think is kind of really stands out to the projections in comparison to what the public is currently drafting them at?
Yeah, I think the thing to me, I mean, so when I floated these projections by some staff internally, Rooker was obviously the big one that stood out. There's a reason he's the cover image. Yeah, he's the main guy that it does is him, but it's he was the 12th ranked hitter on Fangraphs auction calculator. Like, he crushed it. He had 39 homers, 11 stolen bases, which is nothing to look away from. He had almost a 300 average. And yeah, he was hurt. He's like an almost 300 average. He had some great like counting stats like runs, and especially 112 RBIs is definitely going to boost your stock a little bit. But I think a lot of those skill-based increases we saw are sticky, and like it's backed by I'm looking at our like hitter leaderboard right now, and he's the like 8 let's see, 1 2 3 4 5 6 he's the 8th hitter by our Process Plus measure, or I'm sorry, by power. But he's also up there by Process Plus because he makes fine decisions and he makes fine contact, not plus, but like definitely more than enough that his power plays in games. And I think that's something that I really appreciate about our stats, is that it's, it allows you to see like, oh, he actually, crushes the ball when he hits it. And that's something that the underlying metrics validate this. I mean, it seems like he came out of nowhere, because in some senses he did, but he hit 30 bombs in the year before too. So it's like he has a known pedigree as a power guy. And it's just this year he really folded in. He cut his strikeouts by about 4%. He also got really lucky with batted balls. He had a 360 BABIP, which I'm not projecting to continue, but like if you hit the ball hard, generally that'll run a higher BABIP, like just as a kind of rule of thumb. So that helps him. And I think that's true. Definitely looking at like Ozuna is pretty much copy paste what I said about Rooker. It fits him too, of like he had extremely good underlying PLV based metrics, in addition to like, obviously he had a great, actual season too. And I understand that, he's, an old guy. People are a little skeptical, but like it looks like a skill set that is extremely high floor, and he's going to be a guy, he's not going to win you stolen bases in a week, but what he's going to do is put you in contention for the other 4 categories every week. And then guys like Bregman, just another one of those. I don't think, I think the rumors of his demise precede him, that I think he's actually still a really good bat. I know he sees a lot of juice from the Crawford boxes, but I think he has a skill set that can be applicable across parks. Like I think he could still hit for a good amount of power. He's got a really good hit tool. He makes great swing decisions. That's been his MO his whole career. And so I think that gives him a high floor. Same thing, Pasquantino feels like the same kind of player profile, just at first base. Like I think it's focusing on these guys who have, I think, these broader skills, and that's where the PLV stats like decision value can help inform like, oh, actually his floor is higher than we think it is, just because he swings the bat at the right pitches. And so I think that's one of the things to keep in mind here, is it's incorporating not just your box score stats. It's also trying to provide like estimates of talent and how they influence those box score stats.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, when you're in the draft room and like you see these guys kind of falling down to you, I think it's really easy to think to yourself, well, there's another 14 other guys that are allowing this player to fall down to me at this point. You start asking yourself questions like, well, what do they know that I don't? What do the other 14 guys in this room know that I don't? Yeah. How easy is it for you to fall into that kind of a trap and not, again, trust these large discrepancies in projections and just allow yourself to be like, this makes sense. This is who I'm going to pick.
Yeah, I can't remember for sure, but I think it was Steve Giswelli last week on Wins Above Fantasy, but it was something I listened to recently, and it was perfect. ADP is a price, not where you should draft someone, right? ADP is a price, not an evaluation of a player, or somewhat along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, is what he said. Yeah. Love that. And so one thing about Brent Rooker, and I think Uncle Ted in the chat was alluding to it, part of the reason he's drafting a little later is right now he's UT only. Now in the NFBC 50 I'm in, I got the number 1 pick. I took Ohtani and I took Rooker at the 4 or 5 turn. I'm assuming with his repaired elbow, he'll be getting outfield eligibility, maybe not immediately, but fairly quickly in the 2025 season. I could be completely wrong on that. And then I'm adding Ohtani to my pitching staff, right? Is what will happen if that's the case. But yeah, I think that has a little bit to do with it. And I try and I'm getting better. I don't think any of us are perfect at this other than, Phil Deso. He's the robot for a reason. Steve Weimer's really good at it as well. There's a lot of the top players, and that's why they're top players, ignoring completely what you're asking, right? And only going by their evaluations, except for using ADP as a guide to when they have to jump. It's a price. It's not an evaluation.
Yeah. And the last grouping here, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it. I just thought that they were interesting, that there were guys, like we always talk about all these kind of conversations, the guys that are way different in ADP versus projections, or way different in projections compared to ADP. You're lockstep with ADP right now, Kyle, with a handful of guys. And I guess, Kevin, I'll ask you, like, what is it about these players? Do you see a pattern? Do you see something in this list of players that explains this phenomenon of being lockstep with the projection? James Wood, Bryson Stott, Jeremy Pena, Eugenio Suarez, and then our boy Michael Garcia. That's in order of decreasing rankings. Obviously, James Wood being drafted a lot higher than Garcia is, but they're right in line with the rankings from the projections. Do you see anything here that kind of explains that?
Well, 4 out of the 5, and that being the veterans, so to speak, that they, I think, give more value than could typically be the perception of some. And so I think it evens out where there typically could be gaps between the projections and the ADP. There's that none of these guys are considered fantasy superstars, but they all provided value in some way, right? Suarez was 3,100. Pena was pretty good across the board, and I don't know that a lot of people realize that. Stott, stolen bases and runs. Garcia, stolen bases and runs. James Wood, being that the projections come in this close to ADP, this is when I take notice on these young players and rookies. Is it if a projection system does value them as high as the market does, that makes me take notice, and I should be interested in James Wood.
Yeah, let's keep in mind, like, there's no projections out right now. And so all these 5 drafts that are making up this ADP rankings, they're done strictly on, the players that are actually making the decisions. Whether they have their own projections, fine, they probably do, or a lot of them do at least. They're still making these decisions based on perceived value and not so much these publicly facing mass projections like Kyle's putting out right now. So they don't have these at their disposal. So the fact that they do line up is interesting. And I agree with you to see the young guy like that not only be lockstep with the projection, but also be so highly ranked as the mid 30 hitter. A 30th hitter off the board in both scenarios. All right, so a lot of talk on hitters. We got some pitchers to talk about in the same vein. We're going to take one more quick break and then go right to it. All right, let's fly through these pitchers as we've already talked about at the beginning. PLV is great, and it was made to focus on pitchers, but we all agree here that it is more useful to talk about with hitters. So we will scan through these pitchers, and again, I'll do the same thing. Kevin, I'm going to have you kind of talk about the guys that are higher in ADP compared to the projections first. Corbin Burns, Luis Castillo, Michael King, Taj Bradley, and Bowden Francis. I'll get the elephant out of the room first. Michael King. Kyle, I'm going to let you start this one off. Tell everybody why Michael King is ranked so poorly in comparison to where he's being drafted.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that's tough about projections, and it's like something I'm working on my process through as the season or as the off season goes on. is especially for pitchers, I need to make a distinction between are they starting or are they relieving. And right now I'm making that based on their last 3 years of data. And so for Michael King, it's tough because it's like, yeah, he started 30 out of 31 games this year. But before that, he was almost exclusively a reliever. And so based on kind of that broader sample of appearances, right now I have him as a reliever. That's something, I'm going to be tweaking. And especially as the off season goes on, I'll be doing kind of more like manual implementations of that as I see news articles, or especially as free agents start to sign, that is like, okay, this guy's going to be their number 4, number 5 starter, whatever. So yeah, so right now it's spitting him out with the 60 inning reliever projection and a ton of appearances, no starts. And so that's going to affect like his win chances, his win projections, and then just the lack of volume is going to drop his Ks and the ability of a good ERA and a good whip to like influence value. So that's why some of these guys you'll note are a lot lower, and it's just because I have them flagged as relievers, even though they probably won't be, especially as the offseason goes on.
Yeah. So, I mean, Kevin, I want to be able to say that this is easy to pick apart like it was the hitter version where we saw all young players, but we've got a pair of, veterans and a pair of still pretty young guys. What is it about this grouping, or is there any particular name of the 5 besides Michael King, so the 4 left over, that stand out to you as to why their ADP should be so much higher? And does it have to do with format? I mean, I got to put another, elephant in the room here. This is based solely on NFBC, and all 5 of these drafts, if I'm not mistaken, are still DCs. There might be a 50 in there, but they're still draft and holds that are populating this ADP. So obviously that format is going to play a little bit of a factor.
Yeah, I think it's name recognition for most of these guys, and in Bowden Francis's case, just exploding onto the scene the way he did in 2024, for the most part. That's really what I see here. Michael King would have been the big discrepancy. I will say, 28th pitcher off the board. I think he went quite a bit later than that in most of the drafts I've seen, or maybe that's about right. But I don't actually see a whole lot here that surprises me. Maybe that Bowden Francis is that low in the projections as the 352nd pitcher. I guess that's the biggest one. Luis Castillo and Corbin Burns. I mean, I understand both. I understand why projections might be a little low on them coming into 2025, or a little lower than they probably were coming into 2024. They disappointed us a little bit. Not hugely. I don't think they hurt us. But with their name recognition, they're still being drafted about the same spot they were last season, maybe just slightly lower. So yeah, there's nothing here really surprised me that much, other than how low Bowden Francis was ranked.
I think that there's something we talked about, it's with playing time with hitters, but like these are all the starters are getting 160 innings with these projections, right? And then thus the rankings are reflective of those 160 innings.
So it's taking away the advantage of the guys that go deep into games.
Even just 180. Like just go up 20 extra innings, that's going to make a big difference, especially in this day and age where you rarely are seeing anybody go over 200 innings, at least not multiple, not a whole lot of, no more than a handful of pitchers in this day and age. But at the same time, it's also, who's to say Bowden Francis gets 160 innings next year? Every pitcher can, get in, can and almost will get injured, knock on wood. Don't wish that on anybody, obviously. But it happens all the time. And then who's to say that, what we saw this year and isn't isn't the norm, and won't be what we see moving forward. Obviously, there are some analysts out there that don't believe it, and these projections obviously are indicative of that. And so, who's this? That very well could be the norm moving forward as well.
Could I bring up one thing before we go to Kyle here for the Knicks grouping? I think this is going to shock a lot of people. You left this name off. You left the number one pitcher off.
I was trying not to go all the way to the top
later in ADP. Blake Snell at number one. I mean, when I first opened this up, that was the most shocking thing to me because it was the first thing I saw. Blake Snell number one. I was like, oh, I like this.
Yeah. So I guess what is the more shocking one? Is it Brent Rooker as the eighth hitter, or is it Blake Snell as the first pitcher?
It's Blake Snell as the first pitcher right. Because Rooker finished that way in 24.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, since you want to make a comment or defend that decision.
I love it.
I mean, I don't need to defend the guy who won who's two-time Cy Young Award winner. But I mean, like, the thing about Snell, and one of the things we're working on this offseason is having our own pitcher list stuff model. And spoiler, Blake Snell breaks it. Like, he's the number one pitcher. All four of his pitches are good to elite by it. Like, that he just throws such wicked pitches. And I did an article when we released Mistake Rate last year in the offseason about he doesn't leave anything middle. Like, sure, he walks guys, and that's reflected by his pretty high, almost a 10% walk rate projection. But he just he nibbles, and with the stuff he has, it's by design. It's what he's trying to do, and with the stuff he has, he's gonna get those whiffs on those fringe pitches. And then of course, if 160 innings of him, one of the reasons he's probably so low. And I mean, he's still finished. I'm just looking again at Fangraphs, SP 46. So mid 40s starting pitcher, but at 104 innings. That's a pretty impressive return on that volume, especially when you have, a handful of guys that are over almost twice as much volume. But he put up, a 3.12 ERA. All of his ERA estimators were under 3, almost a 35% strikeout rate. The things he does so well. And that's kind of, we'll see that a lot. I know number one on the, I'm going to spoil this for you, Adam. I don't think you introed it, but number one on the projection higher list is Tyler Glasnow. And it's because 160 would be his career high by almost 30 innings. So right. You can't project that out, but it's if you can dream that it's he'll be a top 5 guy.
It's literally the same. We're just copy paste the conversations we had about Tyler Glasnow last year in the off season.
Exactly.
You could wish upon a star, but you don't always get what you actually wished for. But that's a great segue. Thank you for teeing that up for me, Kyle. The projections are higher on these 5 guys. And Kyle, tell me why, and I'll give everybody at home listening and watching the full list here. Tyler Glasnow at the top of that list. Spencer Strider obviously has his own little cloud following him around this offseason until we actually see him make his debut. Don't know when he'll actually start, but he is being drafted much lower than you think. Again, this is all based on 160. Carlos Rodon, Yusei Kikuchi, and Nathan Eovaldi. A wide range of draft positions and rankings in general. But what is it about these guys? I think we can really, feel free to talk about Strider all you want, but I think that's the elephant in the room has already been thrown out there. It's obviously this is based on 160 and we don't know where he's actually going to start. So that kind of explains the difference in draft position to rankings there. But what about everybody else's Glasnow notwithstanding, pretty confidently healthy, at least going into 2025.
Yeah, one of the ones, and I kind of mentioned it, I got him in our early mock draft, was Yusei Kikuchi. And I think I liked him even before the trade to Houston, where they seemed to kind of, it seems like they unlocked him, but what happened was the results started representing what his pitches were like.
Mm-hmm.
He models very highly that he is a very good like PLV darling. He's pretty solid, I know, by like Eno's stuff, and he was great by the pitching bot, which is also on Fangraphs. That he had like a 3.2 ERA estimator by pitching bot, which is really very impressive, like 60 plus grade results. And so that's kind of reflected. I think that people just miss that because they'll see, oh, he had the ERA is over 4. He's 6% walk rate's a little high, but it is just like, well, yes, but if you look at even the non-pitch modeling estimators, that it's like he had a 320 xFIP. Like that's wild for a guy who threw 175 innings, and that I would expect that to be more indicative of his ERA next year than his ERA last year. And so all of them rate pretty well. xERA is 3.75, regular FIPS 3.46. But I just think like the PLV really, really likes what he does. And that's going to kind of be a through point on all of this, is that they're kind of like modeling darlings, that they're like, the things that they do are exciting and don't quite show up on a box score as easily, but there are things that do indicate a pitcher has talent. And so Eovaldi's like that too. I think with him, there is, I think, a bit of ageism. I mean, he's 34, going to be 35. I think he got a 3.8 ERA is not that bad, but I think he got dealt a little bit of an unlucky hand. I think that he's the kind of guy that I think you can draft him later on as your like SP4, or I mean, what is he? Oh, 80? Yeah, if you're in a 12-team league, that's SP6. So like you can, like, I would draft him and be confident later on in that I think he's someone, he doesn't have that name recognition, but the things he does bring him up, that I just really like it. I'm also I like his pitch profile. Like I think the like splitter that he has is extremely effective, and I think that that's something that, I mean, especially if you ask Nick, is he downgrades every pitcher that throws a splitter, but I mean, they're very effective pitches, man. And I think all of his pitch types, he's got 5 pitch types that all rated above average by PLV, and that kind of breadth of repertoire generally yields good results, because if a guy doesn't have a pitch one day, or if the lineup he's facing has guys who hunt sliders or something, that he has things that he can pivot to, and he has, I think, a little bit more adaptability than a lot of guys in this like SP80 range. And then I know I mentioned yeah, exactly. But yeah, that he has more weapons to kind of like, okay, I gave a guy this look first and second time through, third time through, like, all right, here's my cutter, here's my, here's the splitter again, or here's like the curveball in an early count. Like keep hitters on their toes, and there's a huge value to that. And I mean, I already touched on that. Carlos Rodon, love it. I think he's the kind of guy. I was listening to The Craft earlier today, and just mentioned that like Rodon is just a stuffed monster, and so it's nice to see that in the postseason, it seems like his results are starting to validate what the models were seeing as the season went along. He's never going to be a great command guy, but it's not going to be like, he's walking everybody. It's just going to be that, like, yeah, he might be prone to get hit around a little bit, so like the blow up starts might happen, but like, again, we're looking at this kind of at a roto level, that like on a season long scale, I think the good more than outweighs those few blow up starts. And again, like kind of thumb on the scale of like, if okay, he's playing the Red Sox in Boston, like that's a big hitter environment. Like maybe I don't start him if I don't need like those stats this week or something like that. That I think he's the kind of guy that you can slightly game plan around his weaknesses a little bit more than others.
Kevin, anybody on this list that you're like, super excited to be drafting in the same room as the people making up this ADP, and so that you could take advantage of the differences between at least what the projections here are doing compared to where they're actually going.
First thing I did when I saw this list was go look at the men pick of Yusei Kikuchi, which is listed at 113. I'm like, okay, that's early 8th round. I'm going to queue him up for the 7th round in every 15-team draft I'm in.
There you go.
And then the second thing I did was I just discovered this by accident over the last couple of days, Adam. I don't know if you know about this little tip here. Because we have talked about in the past over the years, when you click on a player's page on the NFBC, you get this graph of their ADP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, right now it starts in October of 2023.
Oh, right.
So you got this whole cluster for the first half of the graph. But then October of 2024 is included, and they get added when they're drafted, not when the draft is completed. So drafts, you can go down here and see that actually right now Yusei Kikuchi's min is at 108. A little earlier, but still, if I'm going to jump in the 7th round, I'm still okay. But that I checked that out too, and yeah, that was the first thing I went to look at when I saw these rankings, was because in addition to where he's ranked, like Kyle alluded to earlier, a full off season with the Houston Astros organization now, compared to Toronto, I will take that for any pitcher.
There you go. Yeah, love the real time additions. Hopefully that sticks around once they filter out.
Once there's too many drafts, there'll be too
it
many
don't matter.
to kind of maneuver it, but then we'll have enough included in the ADP, it won't matter.
I'm assuming too that sooner or later those 2023, 2024 drafts will go away.
When they switch the season over, yeah, they'll be gone.
Yeah, so take advantage of that for now.
But then we'll have actual positions too, and I kind of like the advantage of the positions being wrong in the draft room.
Yeah, and just make sure you use Kyle's app that he literally built on a whim for calculating position availability based on the format in the platform that you're on. Yeah, I mean, I love that because usually my go-to is going to Fangraphs and going down the list, and you can see the position where they played, how many games they showed up, and how many games. But you had to go to everybody's player page. That's the only information I actually needed. That's all I needed. So now I have my go-to app for doing that, which is great. Last grouping here that I literally only included this list for one name and one name only. And Kevin, I know you know exactly who that is. But I will give you all 5 names. Kevin, what is it about these players that are that the public is keeping them in lockstep in comparison to what Kyle's projections have put out? Garrett Cole, Jack Flaherty, Robbie Ray, which is the name, Brandon Pfaadt, and then Nick Lodolo. We're ranging anywhere between Garrett Cole in the mid to early 20s pitchers rankings, and then Nick Lodolo is right around that sweet 100 spot on both the rankings and the ADP for pitchers coming off the board. What is it about these guys that kind of stands out as why they might be in lockstep with the projections?
I think it's going to go back to what we talked earlier, both pitchers and hitters, and it's going to have some to do with the 160 innings. I think the guys that you would expect to be ranked higher probably you're expecting to go over that, and the guys you would expect to be ranked lower, you won't expect to get there. But the fact that they're even out in ADP, I think makes sense as well, because it's the 2 younger guys, Brandon Pfaadt and Nick Lodolo, right, that people are going to be more excited about. But we probably shouldn't expect 160 innings out of either one of these guys. So the ranking isn't actually as high as the ADP. I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, is there anything else that stands out? I mean, I love the fact that you do have such a mix and match of types of players, with the two young guys, with one, veteran who started off with a lot of question marks, Garrett Cole, because of injury concerns and obviously struggling when he first came back, at least production wise. And then Jack Flaherty, who, a lot of people had just written off completely, obviously refound himself in Detroit and then continued to be in the spotlight now in the World Series with the Dodgers, starting game one, by the way. And then Robbie Ray, who came back from his own injury, Tommy John, and one of the first guys this year to come back from Tommy John, of the ones that came back during the season, Tyler Mahle being another one that comes to mind. Is there anything about this group, because it doesn't see on the surface, they're all very different pitchers. They're all in very different stages in their career, in their health, and in free agency for at least one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to like different guys have different skills, and I think it's very important to take that into consideration. And that's something that's kind of reflected here, that the good guys like your Garrett Cole, like it seems like he had a down year, and I think again that's kind of volume based, but like he still had a 3.41 ERA. He had a mid-20s strikeout rate, which is wild to think for him. Like he's the King Cole. He's the guy who gets all of the swinging strikes every game. But I think it's nice because it's like these are guys that like I feel like I'm not planting a flag on them, and so it's good to be like, oh, okay, that's nice that it lines up with expectation. Same thing with like, Flaherty's like the Dodgers. If the Dodgers trade for a pitcher, and I agree with kind of how everyone else agrees with, like, values him, I'm good. That like, okay, if I kind of like that the Dodgers traded for a pitcher and I like that pitcher, okay, I'm on the same path a little bit. And then something I like about, I think Robbie Ray really has some good comeback potential. I liked his stuff. I think he had like that first start was like a gem, I think, when he came back from injury, and everyone was like, is he gonna, is Robbie Ray back? And like he wasn't, but I think that there are a lot of the parts are still there.
Not that first inning. The first inning was scary.
Yeah, that's fair. But like I think the parts are still there for him to be like kind of the Robbie Ray of old. Like I at least see enough of the flashes that I feel like, sure, okay, he's still got that club in his bag. And then Lodolo and Fott, like those are guys with huge breakers that like I think can do a lot of damage. If I know in Fott's case, like if he can start to like locate it a little bit better, then that's a huge benefit to, I mean, him. Like I think he has a lot that he can really do with that.
So yeah, I love the fact that there are, like, we talk about these kind of conversations always come up like, oh, what's the difference between what the value you can get on a guy and what is the public value and based on ADP, and the fact that before these projections are even available, there are at least more than a handful of guys that are just literally lockstep right in line, both the small sample ADP and the initial projections that are coming out, is actually pretty interesting. But that, with that, I think there's plenty of players. You want to know all the details. You want to know all the specifics. Again, go get PL Pro, get your projections, sign up for the year. You're going to get these all year, and then you're going to get V1 for next year already kind of baked in the timeline, as well as everything else that we have planned out. And I will let that all trickle out throughout the off season, because there is plenty to talk about when it comes to what PL Pro is going to be throwing at you throughout the season. Kyle, any kind of closing remarks regarding your projections in general, PLV? We kind of talked a lot about it at the beginning, but it's like anything else that either came to mind that we didn't bring up, or things that people should be keeping an eye out for, specifically when it comes to the things that you are working on putting out, in especially if they're not going to see you at First Pitch Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing to keep in mind with these projections is it's an iterative process. This version 1 for a reason. These aren't final. There's a lot of like bugs that'll pop up or things that don't work. Like I'll know better, but that algorithmically makes sense. So like the Michael King thing and like how I handled that. So I'm going to go tweak some stuff later to bump him back up to where he should be. So like I'm constantly iterating. I'm taking a look. Like I have one out, especially as playing time is going to be a big one. That's going to be another update that comes on down the line. And then, I mean, like I'm confident every time I put projections out there, but I'm always kind of skeptical or looking for, did I incorporate this the right way? Is there something else that somebody mentioned that I can incorporate? So like, these are living things. Like the projections are a living thing, and I'll try and keep it as up to date as I can. But yeah, always be looking for the most recent version, because I think that's going to be the best one. The next one's always the best one, kind of thing. But yeah, I'm really excited. I'm going to be, I know, like I mentioned at first pitch, talking bat speed. I'm going to be doing some work with that before we get there, and probably a little bit after. And so depending on my findings with that, I might start folding some of that information into the projections. It's tough because there's no year to year, but like I said, like if things start to line up or make sense, I'll incorporate them as the off season goes on.
Perfect. And Kevin, as we typically do, lead us to the end of the episode with any kind of like insight that you've gathered from talking to Kyle about how you use projections, about just early drafts, whatever kind of added nuggets you got for us. Close us out with that.
Yeah, I think as more and more people have started using projections, and there's several of them available, but a few years ago, I found it to be a huge advantage, and it still is, but I don't think it's as big of an advantage now that more people trust projections. Not very long ago, not very many people trusted them at all. But you kept hearing over and over again for a few seasons that the projections were outperforming ADP. People started listening. Now more and more people listen. So it was a few years ago when it was Alexander Chase made the comment to me that if you draft using projections, you're drafting a mid-pack team because projections are 50th percentile. And my response was, that's true if everybody's using them, but not very many people do use them. That has changed. So now I think that advantage is coming down. And what I'm getting at is every year, and I'll say it multiple times this offseason as well, don't cherry pick from different projection systems to verify your biases. This projection system likes the player I like. This one doesn't like this player I don't like. However, at the same time, if you can find a reason that projection system likes them better than others, and then you got to start moving, right? You can't just count on everybody getting their 50th percentile. You have to decide who's going to outperform it and who's going to underperform it in instances. And if that's because a projection system you trust more likes a player better, then yeah, cherry pick that player.
All right. Oh, I'm not muted. Oh, look at that. Cool. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on with us today. But that is going to wrap it up for episode 186 of On the Wire. Thanks once again to Kyle Bland. Follow him at Bland Analytics on the Twitter. And with that, I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hasting. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.